Hey folks, on the last coffee-centric episode of Basics, we showed you the ins and outs of how to brew the absolute perfect cup of mud at home. This week, thanks to a sponsorship from Trade Coffee, we're taking a deep dive into coffee's fussy, high-strung Italian cousin, espresso. Whether served in an oversized novelty mug with steamed milk, foam, whipped cream, and chocolate, or greeting you at the door wearing nothing but its crema, here's how you can enjoy this hyper-caffeinated cafe specialty in the warm morning light of your home kitchen. Let's get down to basics. So as I mentioned, today's episode is sponsored by Trade Coffee, which is an online subscription coffee service. They've got this really cool coffee personalization quiz. Just answer a few questions, click a few pictures, and you get a selection of coffees customized to your tastes, preferences, and brewing methods. The coffee is then literally roasted to order before being shipped fresh to your doorstep. As you can see, I asked for some medium to dark roast whole bean coffees ideal for espresso, and here they are. Which brings me to a kind of an interesting point that you'll see that only one of these is actually an espresso roast. And that's because you don't necessarily need an espresso roast to make espresso. It's definitely a good starting place, but I've got a whole host of beans here with different roast levels and flavor profiles. And just like any brewing method, there's plenty of room for experimentation and figuring out which one is right for you. Another misconception is that espresso needs to be made from super dark, oily roasted coffee beans like this, or that darker roasts somehow have more caffeine. In fact, the inverse is true. Lighter roasts actually tend to be slightly higher in caffeine, and in the end, any one of these guys is going to make a mean cup of espresso. Now let's try some out. For the sake of consistency, I'm going to go with this Flying Monkey from PT's Coffee. It's a medium dark espresso roast with notes of milk chocolate, graham crackers, and honey. Sounds pretty good to me. So first and most importantly, let's talk about the grind. Any coffee nerd or barista worth their beans is going to tell you that you got to grind your beans fresh. And grinding your beans fresh for espresso means making use of a conical burr grinder, because it's just not possible to create a consistent grind using a blade grinder. This is a relatively inexpensive one at about $100, but you can get one that looks like a pepper grinder for like $20. Then it comes down to what grind consistency is going to work best for your brewing method. Let's start with maybe the most inexpensive option, the mocha pot. This little guy that makes a single shot of espresso is available for about $20. Basically, you're just going to unscrew the top chamber brewing deal here, underneath which you will find a little brewing basket into which you're going to place your coffee. Just fill it to the top without pressing it down with a medium to fine grind of coffee. Fill the chamber below with hot water up to the valve. Replace the filter basket over top, screw the brewing chamber on, and you are ready to rock. Now all this thing needs is a little bit of heat. Simply place it on your... Oh, that's not really going to work, is it? Alright, well I have not busted this guy out in a while, but it's time for some vintage Babish. Onto the induction burner it goes over medium-high heat. Normally you can leave the lid down, but I want you guys to be able to see what's going on. And within 1 to 2 minutes, the pressure and heat should build up in the chamber below and press its way up through the coffee, brewing you a single shot of espresso. While it does not have the distinctive crema floating atop the coffee, this to my knowledge is the least expensive and most accessible way to make a cup of espresso at home. It's relatively strong, it's nice and clean tasting, but if you want to go a little bit more coffee nerd, it's time to get into AeroPress territory, which to make espresso we just have to deviate from the manufacturer's suggested brewing instructions slightly, changing the brewing ratio to 20 grams of finely ground coffee and 55 grams of nearly boiling water, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, no distinctive layer of crema atop the coffee, but it's still a halfway decent shot of espresso. But what if you want to make the real deal without spending hundreds if not thousands of dollars on a complex machine? Well, allow me to introduce you to the manual press. This one's called the Flare. It's available for around $140, and it's a great illustration of how espresso is made with heat and pressure. It's also a great example of how important grind size is and why you can't use a blade grinder instead of a conical burr. Because not only do we need the grinds to be consistent, we need them to be a very specific size. Example number 1, coffee that is ground too coarse. All the extra space between the grinds lets the water pass through too quickly, leaving you with a semi-strong cup of coffee instead of espresso. You can see it's got a little bit of foam on top, but not the pumpkin orange crema that we're after. For that, we need to grind our coffee a little finer, but not too fine. Too little space between the grains makes it almost impossible to press the coffee through, and you'll break your machine before pulling a single decent shot. As you can see, it's got the crema that we're looking for, but not quite enough coffee. For that, we need the Goldilocks situation. This is going to depend entirely upon your grinder, and it's just going to be a matter of trial and error with your machine until you find the sweet spot. For me, it's 16 grams of coffee ground between levels 1 and 2 on my grinder, tamped with about 20 pounds of force, filling up the cylinder with 60 milliliters of 200-degree Fahrenheit water. Yes, I know I just mixed metric and imperial, I'm sorry. And extracted with about 35 pounds of force. How do you know how much pressure you're putting on the machine? Well, it's a little bootleg, but you can use a bathroom scale. You should be pressing down on it pretty hard without putting your full body weight into it, and the extraction should take about 35 seconds. A good espresso shot, you'll notice, will separate into 3 parts initially: a thick, creamy crema on top, a sauntery, mysterious, dark orange body below that slowly disappears into the crema, and the deep chocolatey brown coffee underneath it all. I know this seems awfully fussy, but espresso is an awfully fussy drink, and there's only one way to make it, the right way. And once you've made it the right way, you can make all different kinds of things out of it. Let's start with maybe the easiest one, espresso romano, which is really just a shot of espresso served with a little squeeze of lemon and a lemon wedge. I know this seems pretty simplistic, but it's actually really nice. That said, it obviously does increase the acidity of the coffee a great deal. I never really take sugar in my coffee, but a little half teaspoon in this case goes a long way. And now, maybe even easier, the cafe americano, which is really just an approximation of American-style drip coffee by adding hot water to a double shot of espresso. This is largely believed to have originated during World War II when American GIs would water down espresso to get that familiar taste of home, but this is not confirmed. Now, to make most other espresso drinks, we need 2 things: milk and steam. Now, usually steam ones like this one are attached to relatively expensive machines, and unless you spend a whole lot of money, they don't work very well. They're sputtery and slow to start, and they're perfectly good for foaming milk, but not so good for getting micro bubbles that you might want for something like a latte. A much less expensive at-home option is an automatic milk frother. These guys are pretty set it and forget it. Add some milk, hit the button, and in a few minutes you will have some nice, hot, foamy milk. With an emphasis on foam, this machine produces a lot of foam and not that much steamed milk, which is great for some drinks like cappuccinos, but not so great for others. An even better option that you probably already have kicking around the house is a French press. Simply heat your milk to 145 degrees Fahrenheit, pour it into your French press, and froth it using the metal filter by just sort of jamming it up and down a few times. This, when done with restraint, produces steam milk and foam that much more closely resembles what you get with a steam wand than most other at-home solutions. The last step here is to swirl it, tap it on the counter, and let it rest for about 30 seconds. This gets rid of any larger bubbles and makes the foam nice and glossy. Alright, so we got our steamed milk. Now how about we make some drinks with it? I'm sure I'm gonna get a few things wrong here, but tell me exactly how I'm wrong in the comments. Let's start with a cappuccino, which is a double shot of espresso and equal parts steamed milk and very frothy foam. We're gonna start by pouring from up high, which allows the steamed milk to mix with the coffee, and then move closer as we get to the foam, which allows it to settle on top. You can see that the foam is pretty thick and it forms a clearly defined layer on top of the coffee. Now, the big difference between a cappuccino and a latte is that a latte has more steamed milk and a more finely textured foam. Same deal, pour from up on high and then get down low once you reach the foam. If you were looking for latte art, you came to the wrong channel. I am not that talented nor graceful. The foam should be very light and creamy and not too bubbly and frothy. As you can see, it's a much less defined layer than with a cappuccino. Next up, we're doing a cafe mocha. We're going to start with a double shot of espresso and add to it an equal amount of chocolate sauce. Then from there on out, it's kind of the same deal as a latte, whole lot of steamed milk, a little bit of foam, and we're practically eating dessert at this point, so we might as well top it up with some whipped cream, cocoa powder, chocolate drizzle, cinnamon stick, big chunk of birthday cake, I don't know. Okay, I'm talking trash, but this is obviously delicious, just don't tell anybody I said so. And maybe serve this with a little cookie or something instead of a cinnamon stick. Next up, we have a cortado, which is a single shot of espresso to which we're going to add an equal amount or more steamed milk and top with a little dollop of foam. Easy peasy. And even easier is the macchiato, or a double shot of espresso with a big dot of foam on top. Yes, this is a macchiato, not what Starbucks has led you to believe is a macchiato. Last but not least, if we really want to eat our coffee, we have to serve it over ice cream in what is otherwise known as an affogato. A single scoop, or in my case, a couple tiny scoops of vanilla ice cream topped with a double shot of espresso. Cold and hot, sweet and bitter, this is a simple and lovely Italian dessert for the ages and for any time of year. I know it's not really an espresso beverage per se, but I was running out of ideas. I just want to say thanks again to Trade Coffee for sponsoring this episode. The first 100 people that use the link in this video's description or enter code Babish at checkout will get 30% off their first match and never pay shipping. Trade has a massive amount of high-quality coffees roasted to order, customized to your preferences, and continually evolving to suit your tastes. It only takes a minute to take their coffee quiz online and get matched with the roasters and beans that best suit your brewing practices. It's fresh, it's convenient, it's personalized, and it is the best price for the best quality coffee you're going to find anywhere. I hope you guys give it a try for yourselves, tell them Babs sent you, and get to brewing the best coffee you've ever had today.